Shalom, and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of a Shabbat teaching with Rabbi Gordon Bernat-Kunin.
Sometimes when I'm teaching, I'm not sure if this inspires or annoys my students, but I say to them, I really wish we had 14 hours for this class because it's almost torture to try and do it in the amount of time that we have. So I'm going to do the best to focus on a few elements of the chapter 8. And I just want to say, Rabbi Schatz, it's the student surpassing is definitely hitting me hard in the heart. So thank you for the introduction. Okay, so I'm going to do some of this together, and some of it I'm going to summarize as we go. Let me just tell you the game plan. Okay, here's the game plan. We're looking at chapter 8 in the Parsha, and that is on, if anyone can find it. 1039. Perfect. Okay, and what I'm imagining is that, I don't know who would make this film, but imagine that the director comes to you and says, I've been dying to make a movie of chapter 8 of Devarim. And in order to do that, I need you to lay it out for me like a storyboard. And I need you to break it into sections so that the person who's actually, directing the film is able to capture the essence or the themes that go through this chapter, okay? So what I'm going to ask you to do, and I'll probably give you 5 minutes to do this, is I want you to read the chapter with a partner, okay? And what I'd like you to do is the following. Number one, as you're reading it, look for what would you call each of the different parts of this narrative, parts of this story. Give it a title, okay? And say, from verses 1 to 2, from verses 3 to whatever, I would call this something, okay? That's what I'd like you to do with the chapter. And then, does that make sense, what I'm saying? It's almost like there's going to be scenes within this chapter, and I want you to break it down into those scenes. And then I also want you to do one other thing as you're going along. All this in 5 minutes will be miraculous, okay? If it can actually happen this way. The second thing I want you to do is notice key words which keep coming up throughout the entire chapter. Because my assumption is that those key words help us understand something about the meaning of what this chapter is trying to teach us. Okay? Ready, set, go. Almost the majority here. You ready? I know I need to be next to. Okay. So first thing, here's what I think. I think that this chapter says some very profound things about not only the story of the Jewish people, but of human nature. Okay, and I'm trying to figure out from the details of how this story unfolds what we can learn about, I'll call it the diagnosis of human nature, or the problem of human nature. So I'm going to go through it pretty quickly, okay, because I want you to see the problem, and then I want us to talk about possible solutions or responses to the problem, okay? All right, so the first, what did you put as your first section? And I'm probably only going to do this for a little bit, and then I'm going to lay some stuff out, and you'll have to see, did I see it that way or not? Okay, so what's the first line doing when it talks about, look at chapter, huh? Okay, it lays out these instructions. Like, if you follow these instructions, you'll be in good shape, and if you don't, not so much. Right? Okay, so let's call this like the preamble, the introduction, right? This just frames the whole chapter. And then where do we go? What's the setting for the next piece? Where does it take place? We're talking about just history in general. Like if we look at, say, verses 2 through 6, where does that happen? Okay, you're about to go into the land. Moses is, you could say, warning, rebuking, saying, I know you better than yourself, Israelites, and I need to tell you I'm worried about what might happen when you get there. So you're at the edge, you're in the Midbar, you're in the wilderness, and how are the people surviving? What's going on there? Mana, right.
It's a test where the people anticipate the worst, but somehow the worst that could happen does not happen. In fact, looking back on it, they had it worked out. Actually, it worked out.
Well, let's see. I want to take it step by step, right? What's God's? If God is raising the Jewish people, training the Jewish people to go in the land, what are the strategies or what are the tools that God's using to get them ready?
Testing them with hardships.
Testing them with hardships, okay? That's a form of training. Also, feeding them with man, as somebody said, right? In other words, you're going to be highly dependent on God. Why would you do that? Well, you might, because you want their, whatever. You want their allegiance. You want them to feel the sense of, we rely day by day on God providing for us, okay? And I think the clothes last a long time. There's none of that. What is it? Something obsolescence? That didn't happen, right?
And just when they were hungry, God gave them manna, and they didn't know anything about what the heck manna was.
Okay, correct. And there's a lot of discussion about if that was good or bad, but let's keep going. Next scene, right? Remember, it's like you were in this desert. You were in the wilderness. Then what's the next step? You'll find it in verses 7 through 10. Yeah?
God is going to bring you in and all these wonderful foods that he's going to have.
Great. Okay, so you're going to get into the land of milk and honey, land of plenty. And what's the response of the Israelites when that happens initially? Look in verse 10. The Birkat Hamazon, all right? Or the basis of the Birkat Hamazon is their first reaction is, right? Ve'achalta, you're gonna eat. Ve'savata, you're gonna be satisfied.
Wait, that's not the response. That's not the response of Jewish people. It's the response that God wants.
Yes.
You're going to eat.
When you get there, this is what you'll do.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
That's not the.
Okay.
That's not the response of people.
So let's say that's God's hope that they would do that. They'll eat, they'll be satiated, and they'll bless. And then God says, look at the next stage of it. The next stage, what would you call this?
Be grateful for what you got.
Okay, that was what we just did, verse 10. And then where does God think the people will go in verse 11 through 18? What do we see there?
It's like a lesson in humility, because all of a sudden he's worried God's worried that they're gonna think they did all of this, but really it's God.
Okay, so watch what happens. They go through this stage where I'm kind of summarizing, okay? You're going to have all this food, and you're going to build 3-car garages with pools, and you're going to have amazing, natural resources at your disposal. And then what are you going to do? You're not going to say, "Ve'achalta v'savata uverachta." Instead, what are you going to do? You're going to say, this was all the work of my hands, right? I got myself all of these things. Are we together? That's the next piece. And then there's, you know what? The last piece, the last two lines is, if you do that, God will be furious. God will punish you. Okay, so look what happened. We started with total dependency in the wilderness, right? And we got to, at least the worry is, you will go to the other end and you'll say, kochi va'otzim yadi asali kolachal. As that, my strength in my hands got me everything, so I'm totally independent. I'm like the self-made person. All right, everybody. So
it's today's situation.
We are going to go there in a little bit. We're going to talk about that. Hold on one more second. So when you think about this, if you were going to give this 7 words summarizing this picture of human nature, what would it be? Only 7 words. Anyone want to try? Okay, don't forget where you came from. I'm going to give you 87% on that answer. Okay, it was very good. Anybody else have an idea? You got to build on that. That was excellent. What else?
It's a long journey. You didn't do it on your own.
Okay, long journey, didn't do it on your own. Still one more piece that we don't have. Yes, I think you just nailed it. I think you added the piece, right? In other words, it's not just remember where you came from, right? It's also when we're in the midst of plenty, when we have everything and beyond what we need, our tendency is to forget the source of our blessings. That's what I think it's saying. So now we've got a little bit of time. I want to go to one more piece of this. Ready? Which is, so if let me put it in a little different language. How do you avoid spoiling your children in the midst of plenty?
You let your grandparents do it.
Okay.
You let your
Very
parents
good.
do it too. You let your parents do it. Your parents do it.
Okay. But let's say that's going to be problematic, right? Like, I mean, it may be helpful, but what do you do to get out of this cycle, right? God's saying, like, I'm worried about the way you're wired, Jewish people, because my concern is once you get all of this independence and all of this bounty, I think you're going to end up being decadent. You're going to devolve. I think it's heat down the roots. Like, you're going to start going down spiritually. So what do you do to avoid this danger? Yeah?
Keep them connected to God. You can have God. Because you don't know.
Okay.
Nothing.
So so that would be a good goal. Like, how do you keep them connected beyond themselves to God? What other ideas do you have? What would you do, folks, if you were like trying to? Yeah.
As a parent with young kids, we talked about this. How you get a baked good or something, like it didn't just appear out of thin air. There was a whole process and a lot of work that went into it, and that's one of the reasons we say a bracha for it, is because we're not taking for granted that a lot of people have to do work from it to go from being farmed to table.
Yeah, great. Okay, so one of those key words I would say in this passage is bracha.
Yeah.
And it may not be just, help them memorize the words and they'll do it. It may be like, how do you create within a child or a person an awareness that there is something beyond them that, was a gift? It wasn't just something they made. Yeah.
I think this works with kids for sure, but also in any kind of giving, that if you know what your gift is going to go to, or if you know what you receive, where it came from. So when someone donates something in this building, there's not just a plaque, but there's a story behind why. What did they feel connected to? What was the reason behind it? But there's also a story from the person who asked for that gift of, we see you at the forefront of, reading Torah, and so we want you to be the one to give us the Torah cover. So I think the communication and the reciprocity of storytelling, and to Bobby's point, where things come from and why they're being given, and making sure, in the case of kids, that they know that if they are receiving something, that they should also think about how they can give back.
Beautiful, beautiful. And it's not just mana
Right.
coming down and landing in your lap, but you know the story of what it took to get you there.
You know, I
Yeah.
got a call from one of my great nephews,
Mhm.
the oldest one, and he said, he just entered yeshiva. He goes, I'm trying to raise money, great uncle, for kids who can't afford to do it. And I normally would say, that's nice, but he goes, it would mean a lot to me if you would give something. And, you know, but I already felt that this person is a special person.
Got it. I made that connection. Beautiful.
You
All right.
help others. That's how you avoid
So go ahead.
being affected by that.
I think you have to train yourself and somebody else that you have to work for it. In other words, everything cannot be given to you without your working for it in some way. The other thing I want to point out is V'achalta v'savato berachta, which is the reason for Birkat Hamazon. Show what happened in Jewish history is the debate in the Talmud is when do you have to say Birkat Hamazon? Do you have to say it over an olive or over an egg? Which is not when you're satiated, but when you have the minimum you need to survive. That's when you invoke God. So there's a real sense of the difference between the expectation of abundance and the reality that has been a reality in parts of Jewish history, which is that you have the minimum for survival, but even then you are grateful.
You know, the Quakers have a saying.
Hold on one sec. Go ahead, yeah.
The people in this chapter, when they went out of Egypt, they didn't know anything about what they were,
Right.
what was going to happen, and that's common anytime we're going into a situation we've never been before, taking a trip we've never gone there before. We don't know what the heck's going to happen. We don't know if it's going to turn out. We don't know what's going to, if the worst will happen. I see in that a real lesson that it's very common to have a lot of fears and to expect the worst that could possibly happen. I see that as a very common situation in our personal lives.
Let me ask this. I mean, I think one of the questions you could ask about this chapter is, did God prepare them well for the unknown that they were about to face? Because think about this. I mean, is getting manna from the sky setting you up for not being able to come into the land and have this feeling like, think about it, they become like God when they say it all came from me. But let's say they were in the desert and God said, I'm going to teach you to farm before you go in, because I want you to appreciate what's involved to be a partner with God in, bringing about the source of life. So I think we could debate that. I want to finish with this. I know we have to.
Let's
Hold on one second.
Let's touch on one thing.
You got to be quick, though. Yeah.
We should pay attention for a moment to the journey from desert to a land that has something. Which is, imagine what it's like to come out of the desert and to see a land that has no possibility of abundance.
Right. No, I think that could be overwhelming, or, so I'm just at least conjecturing that maybe the awe of that experience might require some kind of training. But I want to finish with this. Just a summary. Blessing, we talked about. Bracha. How do you cultivate that sense in people is one thing. Somebody else mentioned inui, affliction. or you got to work for what you're getting. It's not just, coming from nowhere and you get to benefit from it. Here's another one. A lot of times in this chapter, it says zachor, remember. And it also says al tishkach, don't forget. And somehow that must be saying that, I think, that part of our tradition's understanding of how to face this situation has a lot to do with memory. And we could obviously spend a lot of time thinking about, what does that mean? Does that mean remember that you came out of Egypt? Does that mean remember the Sabbath? Does that mean... Okay, so I think that's another theme. The last thing I'll say is, I think there's a huge emphasis here on the notion of mitzvah. And how do mitzvot work to bring you in between receiving everything from God and saying it's all me? How do you create a partnership with God that reminds you that both you need to acknowledge something greater than you, and you have a role, a responsibility, and a power to partner with God in order to avoid the extremes? Okay.
You've been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast website or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information on Temple Beth Am, Los Angeles, please visit www.tbala.org.